It was December 5th, around 7 p.m., and Rika's beauty salon was bustling with the hair care needs of both the pre-weekend crowd and the pre-holiday crowd. Fred was the owner and the master stylist, and he had had many, many, many devoted patrons who came to him year after year. Fred was up in the salon area, cutting hair. Tracy, his assistant, was in the sink area. And Joyce, one of their many, many clients who was 5 months pregnant, was predictably in the back room using the bathroom. The salon was decorated for the holidays, including a little jingly bell on the door that tinkled whenever the door opened. It was a stark contrast to the cold, rainy December outside. And 10, 12 other patrons wandered around in other rooms, listening to music, watching TV, or just reading magazines. Suddenly, the door opened. 2 men walked inside, both wearing disguises, and one pulled out a gun and said, "This is a robbery." Robber number 1 immediately began hustling people into the back room and asking them to lay down on the floor. Robber number 2 went to the back to get Joyce out of the bathroom. One man was taller and heavier than the other man. They wore different clothes, but beyond that, it was really difficult to tell them apart because of the disguises. One man wore a dark hoodie that he zipped all the way up to cover his mouth. They both covered their heads, but the most significant thing that they both did that night was wear big, dark sunglasses with big, heavy frames. In order to get Joyce out of the bathroom, robber number 2 decided that he would fire the gun and bring her up front. The gun, of course, caused a woman who was laying on the floor to start crying, and she prayed for God to help them. Robber number 1 turned and sneered at her and said, "Even God can't help you now." Now, I pause to remind you all that if I was an omnipotent God and some armed robber dared me like that in the middle of an armed robbery, I would have not been able to resist the opportunity to show him what a little taste of divine intervention looks like. But God is better than me, needless to say, and God probably thought, you know, the good people of Norfolk have a criminal justice system that was built to handle this. They have due process. They have the burden of proof. They have reasonable doubt. They have lawyers appointed to the indigent. They have prosecutors who are duty-bound to seek not just convictions, but justice. They had a police force that could help them every step of the way. So, on balance, God probably thought, let it go. The criminal justice system can handle it. 2 weeks later, on a Friday, Messiah Johnson and a friend went out for a drink. They were going to a favorite club, Tailgaters. They parked behind the club and walked up the very dimly lit parking lot to go into the side entrance of Tailgaters. As luck would have it, Messiah was wearing his prescription eyeglasses. There were big, clear lenses with big, dark frames. And as luck would have it, Fred, the owner of the salon, was coming up Granby Street at just that minute. He was a passenger in a car that was going 35 miles per hour. As Messiah walked into the club, Fred caught a glimpse of Messiah and his friend. Also unbeknownst to Messiah, in that moment, Fred concluded for sure that he had just seen the 2 people who had terrorized his salon 2 weeks before. Fred and Messiah went into the club to get their drink, and Fred hurried home back to the salon where Tracy, his assistant, was still working. And Fred called 911. Now, a show-up ID and an eyewitness ID are 2 different things, and you don't really need to know what they are to know what happens next. As the police went into the club with Fred, Messiah and his friend were coming out. But they didn't run. They walked to the corner to a payphone to make a call. The show-up began right there. Police cars surrounded Tailgaters. They parked behind, they parked on the side, they parked in front. When they realized Messiah was no longer in the club, they had a canine unit pull up to the payphone, and Messiah glanced over and noticed that there was a shotgun drawn on him. He asked what was going on, and they said, "You're a suspect in a robbery." Messiah said there was certainly some mistake being made because they hadn't robbed anybody. The police officers asked Messiah to step out and be handcuffed behind his back and to sit on the curb. He did. The police also went and got Fred and Tracy and put them in the back of a police car and brought them past him at the payphone, halfway down the block, and they asked Fred and Tracy to turn and look out the back of the windshield of the police car. And then they asked Messiah to step into the street and stand up for 20 seconds, handcuffed. That's him. That's what Fred said. That's him. Of course, they took Messiah to the police station, and of course they interrogated him, and of course he attempted to explain what had happened. And it became clear to him pretty quickly that nobody was going to listen to him, and he at that point said, "I know my rights. I'd like a phone call so I can get a lawyer." One of the law enforcement officers said to him, "You don't have a right to a phone call." And he waited 21 days to meet his lawyer. Now, he met his lawyer at his preliminary hearing, which was really the first opportunity for Messiah to see these eyewitnesses that had picked him out. And it was also the first time to see his lawyer in action and see what he could do. Messiah knew that they must be wrong or confused or mistaken because he knew he didn't do it. And he was delighted to watch at his preliminary hearing as they were confused and they contradicted themselves and they contradicted each other. And at that point, Messiah waited for his lawyer to argue, as he could have, that there was no probable cause to hold him any longer and that he could be let go. But his lawyer didn't do that. His lawyer simply sat there. And later, Messiah would learn that there was another thing his lawyer didn't do at that preliminary hearing, and that was insist that a court reporter be there and take notes of what these eyewitnesses had said. So now Messiah had lost a whole round of court testimony about bad eyewitnesses. Messiah began using his own legal skills and wrote a very brief handwritten motion for the judge asking that his court-appointed lawyer be replaced. The judge was irritated with Messiah and said, "You just dismissed an excellent lawyer, a good lawyer, you're letting him go." Messiah prevailed. Months later, that excellent, good lawyer would have his law license suspended. Messiah's family couldn't take any more of court-appointed lawyers, and they pooled together their limited resources and hired a lawyer. Messiah felt guilty, asked them not to, but they said, "You need to let us do this. We need this for our own peace of mind." At Messiah's trial, he would learn that there was now a third eyewitness. Joyce, who'd been in the back in the bathroom, was now also saying that she recognized him as a robber. There was no testimony to use against her at that point, but they got a big break on cross-examination. They learned for the first time that Fred and Joyce, who ID'd Messiah, had also been shown another array of photos and had picked out another suspect and had done that in front of a detective. The defense lawyer said he had never heard this before. The prosecutor said she'd never heard it before. The judge asked everyone to go find the pictures, find the detective, find the alternate suspect. No one could. So when the defense said, "We need a mistrial," the judge agreed, and he granted the mistrial. At the second trial, Messiah would also learn that the surprise for him that day was that in between the two trials, no one had gone to look for the photos, no one had gone to look for the detective, and no one had gone to find the alternate suspect. He wasn't worried, of course, because he knew from the first trial that that will result in a mistrial. But this was a new judge, and this was a different, younger judge, and he denied the mistrial. Messiah still held on and thought, "This is okay, because I have an alibi." In fact, Messiah had 3 alibis. He had 3 alibi witnesses. That night of the robbery, Messiah had been with 3 different women. No, TEDx Crowd, it's not that. On the night of the robbery, Messiah had gone shopping with 2 female friends at a mall on Military Highway in Norfolk. They'd been gone a couple of hours, they made purchases, and then one of the women, who had a very young daughter with her, offered to give Messiah a ride home to his fiance's house. She lived there with her mother. She was 8 months pregnant with their child, and she had asked Messiah if he would come after they shopped and let her braid his hair. He went. That sounds like reasonable doubt to me, but it didn't sound like reasonable doubt to the jury. And he was found guilty. He was found guilty of 6 counts of robbery, 6 counts of abduction, and the abduction is moving people from the front to the back of the salon. He was found guilty of 12 counts of use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, 1 count for each of the felonies. But most shocking, he was found guilty of shooting a gun in an occupied dwelling. Now, for those of you who are playing on at home and have figured this out, don't yell out the answer because I want to look smart. The jury had combined the 2 robbers. Messiah was now robber number 1 up front, cleaning out the cash drawer, stealing purses, taking valuables away from everyone, and he was also robber number 2 in the back, shooting to get Joyce out. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 132 years in prison. His lawyer filed his direct appeal, and it was denied. Right then and there, that was as much due process as the Commonwealth owed Messiah Johnson. He was done in the court system as far as we were concerned. About 3 years ago, his family contacted our clinic at the UVA Innocence Project in Charlottesville and said, "We are at the end of our road, can you help?" Messiah, by the way, was convicted finally in the year 2000. So about 3 years ago, we said, we'll see what we can do. And we started our case the way we always start our cases, which is by returning to the client the presumption of innocence that has been taken from them. The obvious starting point was the eyewitnesses, but as probably you can all guess, eyewitnesses don't usually think that they were wrong, and they don't usually think they're wrong later on either. We went to them, and Messiah's case was no different. Fred was very polite and very firm, and he said, "I know what I saw." Tracy had died 6 months after the conviction even happened. Joyce was polite and told us she would talk to us sometime in the future, but she never opened her door again. So now we were left with the decision of what we could do, if anything. And I learned a little lesson from my Catholic mother when I was about 9 years old, and I base our unofficial clinic rule on this. My mother came into my room and caught me kneeling beside my bed praying, and I was very proud about that because I could then explain that what I was doing was praying for a really good grade on a math test the next day. And she did what she can do well and took my arm and yanked me up and said, "Oh, no, 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 little lady, that's not how this works." She said, "You do everything humanly possible, and then you go ahead and get back on your knees." So our unofficial clinic rule is, I say to students, and my partner Jenny Gibbons says, if you're willing to pick up the phone and call Messiah and tell him we've done everything we can do, by all means. No one has ever taken us up on that. So we did what we do. We got a private investigator and we got all the law students. We said, what if we could solve this crime? What if we could actually solve the crime? They began culling through archived newspapers, and we found articles that talked about the 2 men in that neighborhood who were conducting robberies at this time. And in fact, one of the newspaper articles said that they attributed the Rika's beauty salon robbery to this group of people who were committing robberies. And in fact, that was on the front page. Then we thought, well, what if we could figure out the identities of these people? So we filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and sure enough, we got criminal incident reports that just laid the whole story out in black and white. There was a group of people committing robberies in this neighborhood, and in fact, they'd committed one 2 hours before the salon at Rika's was robbed. They had committed 18 armed robberies, and although the identity of robber number 2 varied, the identity of robber number 1 was always the same. And we had his name. We went to where he was in a Virginia prison, and we thought, what if he would talk to us? We went in, we found out that we had 25 minutes to talk to robber number 1. and I had expected several hours. So instead, I got to be someone I didn't want to be, and I had to walk into a room, shake hands, and say, "Hi, robber number one. Listen, my name is Deirdre Enright. This is a law student. We don't have much time here, and this is going to seem kind of rude, but I have a client, Messiah. He's a really great guy. Said he didn't do it. Armed robbery, Ghent neighborhood, Norfolk, disguises, any of this." And quickly he cut me off and said, "Oh, that sounds like me." So robber number one instantaneously became our number one robber. We visited him one more time, and I lobbed my final Hail Mary and said, "Hey, number one robber, you mind signing an affidavit for all this?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, nobody should be in prison for something they didn't do." So easy. And so there it is. I'm not one of these people that says we should rip down the entire criminal justice system and rebuild from bottom up. I don't say that yet. We are soon going to file a petition for Messiah Johnson, and we hope that this will be his last lap through the criminal justice system. And we would love for you all to follow us on our website at the UVA Innocence Project to see how this goes for him. But I have several, just 2 or 3 takeaway requests from you before I leave. And one is that if we work this, if this happens and we get Messiah released, please, please don't let anyone ever tell you that this is an example of how the criminal justice system works. Innocence projects come in when the criminal justice system has failed. The other thing I want you to be leery of is the crowd that says, "But we get it right most of the time, right?" Those are the people who say that wrongful convictions are just these tiny little needles in these golden haystacks of guilty hay. We don't know how often we get it right. When the conviction is final, that's when we stop looking. And final at that point matters more than right. So be leery of those people. And finally, we would ask you to stay with us in this journey. Messiah Johnson didn't give up. His family didn't give up. His fiance had their daughter and raised her, and she's about to go to college this year. And we ask you to not give up on the criminal justice system, because there are plenty of law students over there in law schools everywhere who can make this system better. So don't give up on us, and don't give up on Messiah. Thank you.